Welcome to the Academic Observer. And let's start. So Geo-Economics is the new geopolitics. That's what this episode says. And fair enough, it's a statement that I say, which extends from this theory of a US military strategist called Edward Luttwak. He is, so to say, the founder of the word Geo-Economics, right? And when he first argued about this, the world was witnessing a true change in its history. It was the fall of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. That's right, the USSR. In the Cold War in the 90s, they were falling behind. That was the bastion of communism. So for the West, this was seen as the end of history as they knew it, and the beginning of this utopian unipolar front, all good era, where the US hegemony could prevail upon all other nations through its policemanship. And so with this, Luttwak, associated to the US, again, he's the founder of the word Geo-Economics. He suggested at the time that, and I quote, if all the players now left in the field stopped waning the importance of military power that had haunted Europe for so long, right, before the 90s, 2 world wars, and accepted themselves instead as purely economic entities in true American fashion, like labor sellers, entrepreneurs, corporates, then only the logic and grammar of commerce would rule the world. And with this, it could lead to the rise of geoeconomics over geopolitics, which would, as per Luttwak, bring down any remainder of humanity's evil and bring about common human prosperity for all. That's what he said in his speech. Now, at the time, he ignored the existing theory of mercantilism, for example, which, although similar in essence, wasn't true to its real purpose, according to him. He said mercantilism was only useful to maximize gold stocks, I think it was, which, of course, goes against his belief of achieving common human prosperity for all through geoeconomics. So now, geoeconomics is the new realization that came through this individual, Luttwak. So it's the rise in world business over world politics. And there's a nice quote that embodies this new chain of thought and trend. And it says, what is true of firms can also be true of nations. As in theory, a single country or a trade bloc can specialize in manufacturing of a particular industry, right? Many people support this. Think about traditional trade theory. Ring a bell, Adam Smith, absolute advantage, David Ricardo, comparative advantage. All that stuff is mainstream now, this chain of thought. So here's where I see a slight mishap that I believe Luttwak misinterpreted. This is my opinion. And it has everything to do with human behavior, right? He was preaching reaching egalitarianism by common prosperity for all. But to do that, he'd have to remove a core natural principle of the man. We're not always altruistic in nature. We like to accumulate goods. That's just the way we are formed. That's just the natural way we think. And while economics can be defined as the movement of goods, the increase of productivity and therefore prosperity, it is also a means to garner power and control upon others. And we're going to look at that into more detail soon when I put geoeconomics in practice. We look at real cases around the world happening right now. So that is real geoeconomics. It's accommodating these two last factors that I mentioned to the definition. Remember, any pervasive inequalities, poverty, war, even diseases, they ultimately have their roots in the actualization of the human will, right? It doesn't matter how institutionalized or politicized this will may appear to be to your eye or 24 an eye. As the old English saying goes, trade will follow the flag and the flag will follow the trade. Now, again, enough of this theory. Let's put geoeconomics in practice. First case I give comes from this northern African country called Chad. It's landlocked. And well, Chad is a francophone country, so it's deeply entrenched with French political systems, right? For decades now, the French patronage has been installed there. It ranges all leaders in the history of Chad, from Tombal Baye to Deby. They've delegated, for example, their country's security to the French army. In fact, the French are so heavily deployed there that Chad's nickname is the French aircraft carrier of the desert. So they've used Chad for all their overt and covert missions, true geopolitical intentions, right? They intervened in this crisis, a Tuareg crisis in Mali back in 2012 via Chad, the Darfur crisis in Sudan as well. And of course, they've also allowed entrance of ExxonMobil, Chevron, Petronas, for example, oil exploration in the country. They've opened ways for the World Bank as well to fund some projects in the country. But it was all mainly to French interests as well. For example, the nuclear thesis they had in the country, which they then passed on to Niger. But uranium, there's some uranium mines in Chad. So it was all mainly geopolitically entrenched there with the French. But recently, for example, the World Bank withdrew its funds from the country of Chad because they claimed there were allegedly huge misallocation of capital in the country, so corruption and all that sort of thing. So with this, the standing leader at the time, he instead issued China with new geo-economic rights for oil exploration and other projects. No politics involved here with China. They're not there to provide any political security to Déby. Instead, they're there to improve oil explorations, build the road projects, railroads, hospitals. Even they licensed the new international airport in the capital city of N'Djamena in Chad, licensed exclusively by the Chinese. Now, China had one big problem at the time with this. Remember, Chad is a landlocked country. So how can they explore in this country geoeconomically if they don't have access to any port, for example? Well, that's when where the Chinese business model shows its true transcontinental features, right? It's the Belt and Road Initiative all over again. And since then, they've closed the deal with Cameroon, for example, which is a neighboring country that has access to the western coast, They built a new port in Kribi, west coastline again, which of course opens that new passage for exporting goods from Chad. They also opened another port in Cameroon, Lalabe. This one had the primary function of helping and supporting their iron ore extractions, which, you guessed it, was led by these Chinese mining concession as well in the nearby site of Mbalam. I think I'm pronouncing the name right. Now, this is only the west coast. Geo-economic interests of the Chinese in the west coast of Africa. One singular example. Now let's move to the east coast, right? In the east coast, China has developed the Lamu port in Kenya. This port has also a rail network that connects to Sudan, Ethiopia. It's a new corridor project financed by the Chinese. In Sudan, they have already built a railway from the capital Khartoum to Port Sudan. They've built a hydroelectric dam as well. A nearby 2 power plants, which are actually nearing the borders of Egypt. Why near the borders of Egypt, you may ask? Well, because Xi Jinping and the Egyptian leader, Sisi, they signed this new Suez Canal corridor project back in 2014. They're also overseeing the construction of 3 canal cities in Egypt, Suez, Ismaila, Port Said. Here there will exist all sorts of new industrial and commercial hubs. 6 associated ports will be built there along the way as well. So these are just some of the projects being developed by the Chinese there in the continent. It's a whole cobweb, and it wholeheartedly represents this new geo-economic frontier, right? As Luttwak envisioned, although it's still missing the common human prosperity factor. But that's pure geo-economics over geopolitics happening right there. And the Chinese approach, by the way, it's not just in Africa. Of course, we all know this in Latin America, South America. I looked recently at Chile. All their soybean production has Chinese concessions. It's crazy. Their green energy explorations as well. In Asia, of course, near the Chinese borders. In Europe as well, they're building 4 ports now in Europe. And Emmanuel Macron, the French president, he actually said, he criticized the EU exactly because of this. He said, naivety and a coordinated approach towards China is harming Europe. The Chinese have completely taken advantage of European division. They've got big projects in every corner. Poland, Estonia, Belarus, Germany, Greece. That's the famous Thessaloniki port situation they have going on there. Even my home country of Portugal, not to mention Ukraine now with the war going on. They've signed deals with the Russians, the Chinese and the Russians. They were building a 200-kilometer highway involved with this port constructed in Yuzhny, I think it's called, in Odessa, which is recently again closed by the Russians because it already had Russian influence in terms of money, right? The port of Shormononsk, how do you say it? Shormononsk, I'm not sure that's well pronounced, but yeah. But well, now let's talk about another thing though. You might have the same thought that I had when I started reading about all this geo-economic exploration being made by various countries, not just the Chinese, Turkey, Russia. They've all got projects going on, even the US starting to have. What are the dissimilarities between this and the colonial rule? Isn't this just a new form of Neo-Colonialism to an extent? Well, this geo-economics penetration is based, according to sources, as being more mutually profitable, give and take non-coercive. There are exceptions to that. And it's also regarded as non-oppressive by those that accept these projects. I've got my doubts, but it's a new path most developing countries are opting to go towards, right? So I'll close this episode with a remark from this economist, Richard Youngs. Then I'll try to explain it perhaps. He says, and I quote, "It appears that everyone agrees that methods of commerce are now displacing military methods, with disposable capital in lieu of firepower, market penetration in lieu of garrisons and bases, and that's materializing. Look at the US. They're imposing all sorts of economic sanctions to Russia for the war, excluding them from SWIFT, for example. That's a geo-economic approach. And these new geo-economic strategies, they are propounding other nations like India and China to start of being also wary of the West. I'm going to go on a tangent here, but I'm just going to speak my mind here for the concluding remarks. Especially because these countries in Asia, including Russia, they're still slightly or highly dependent on the Western consumerism culture, the consumption demand that you have in the West, that's so profitable for these countries in the East to export to, right? Now, the US strategy for sanctions might be a dictation of their war wariness after failures in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. That's what I believe to be the reason why they're now scaling towards geo-economics more over, prioritizing that over geopolitics, right? And by the way, it only attended to Ukraine when the Russians had sort of already invaded. Plus, it's an admittance of weakness they now have to face because China, with all this new geo-economics exploration they've got going on, they have their own multilateral financial institutions, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the NDB, I think it's called the New Development Bank. It's removing financial dependency from the West. So to answer the question of geo-economics over geopolitics, I'll drop my own take here. Regardless of this new trend of using statecraft for economic ends, I think that economic politics and political economics, although there are two different methods, they're still easily interchangeable, right? If the circumstances call for it. Sorry for that. I'm sorry, but not resorting to the military means, well, let me sort of process this. Not resorting to military means to secure economic ends only happens until patience for others is lost. And when one is overassured that their military might is invincible. Never undermine warfare rather than economic warfare. That's just my take because things can escalate. So geoeconomics might be pretty and all, but geopolitics will always be stretching and approaching from behind, right? It's the security dilemma. I urge you guys to search that up. So this was Nuno Gomes from the Academic Observer on Economics, Business and Finance. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found this episode of Geo-Economics over Geopolitics interesting. Thank you once again.